Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show, your one-stop shop for all things Commanders. If you're on YouTube right now, make sure that you've subscribed, hit the notification button so that you never miss an episode like today's episode with my buddy Al Galdi. Al, what is happening?
Big Doug, man, how you doing? Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. The newly coiffed Al Galdi means it has been some time since we've talked. Puts that into perspective. OTAs are pretty much done. Camp will come soon enough. I don't know what we get out of this. I guess where I wanted to get started was Mitch Tischler was on last week. We did the offense. We're going to break down the defense this week, which I'm kind of excited about. It's easy to talk about that offense. I mean, the offense is kind of, the crown jewel here, if we will. I'm curious your thoughts on how the defensive coordinator Joe Witt did last year, and if some of what maybe they weren't able to do was more of a personnel problem that they fixed this year, and what do you expect his defense to look like in year two?
Well, first of all, I'm trying to look like Sam Hartman as best as I can, so that's why I'm growing out the hair. When it comes to the defense, I think it's one of the real big questions about the defense last season. Was it not very good just because the talent wasn't very good, or was it not very good because the coaching wasn't good? I still would like to think that this is a good defensive coaching staff. I mean, if you look at the resumes of the people who were put on this staff, they are impressive. Joe Witt Jr. has an impressive resume. Someone like a Jason Simmons, impressive resume. Ken Norton Jr., impressive resume. So I want to give this coaching staff more than just one season. I don't think the defensive talent last season was particularly good. I think there were some guys who did some good things, like Frankie Louvu had a good season. Bobby Wagner had a good season. But, even their top sack guy, they thought so little of that they didn't re-sign him, even though he ended up only getting a one-year, $6 million contract from Dallas, talking about Dante Fowler Jr., because he was a big liability against the run. So I think that tells you something about how well the defense did. So, I think that the defense should be better. I don't know that you can have great confidence in that, just because I think there are a lot of wild cards with this defense, but I certainly could see a path by which the defense is better. I mean, a lot of changes have been made. You'd like to think that Marshawn Lattimore will be healthier and will be better. He, to me, is the number one wild card with this defense. And then there's the Daron Payne factor. And it was really interesting when Joe Witt Jr. Unsolicited identified Daron Payne as one of the real standouts of the offseason program. Witt got asked essentially who stood out, and he identified Daron Payne. And that led to not only Witt praising Payne, but Dan Quinn ended up praising Payne as well. And so, if 2022 contract season, Daron Payne is about to be in effect in 2025, I think that is massive. So that's something I look at and say, okay, if we're on our way towards seeing that Daron Payne, then I think that bodes very well for this defense. So, I'm thinking Lattimore and Payne are the two big wild cards. I think that, if those guys are what they can be, then this defense will be better. And I think we'll feel a lot better about not just the players, but also the defensive coaches.
Real quick, something is scratching your microphone up. I don't know if you can hear it on your end. You're right about Fowler. They couldn't even play him in the playoff game. The defense was a liability in the run game. I thought it was interesting. Joe Witt Jr. said something about the fact that nobody thought Fowler was going to get the sack numbers he got. They'll get the sacks. They'll find it somewhere. They'll put it together in some combination. As far as the Payne stuff goes, I thought it was really interesting this week. We kind of heard from different outlets, I think John Kine mentioned it, that if you go back to that altercation on the sidelines at the time, and Ron Rivera said it's nothing, and in the moment you can believe it's nothing. Two dudes have known each other for a long time on a bad football team getting upset, but it feels more like Jonathan Allen's presence maybe kept Payne from shining a little bit, if you will, just from an ego standpoint. That I thought was interesting. And to your point, when we get fantastic Payne, it's in a contract year.
Yeah, that's what we got the previous time. You let me know if the mic problem persists. I can maybe try to join you in another way. So that sideline fight with John Allen to me was really interesting because I remember when that happened. I think we all do. It was the night after Christmas, December 26, 2021. It was that horrific loss at the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. And there was a real downplaying of that incident from not only the team, but also from members of the media, where it was like, well, this happens all the time. This isn't that big of a deal. And I remember saying at the time, look, I don't want to make this into, a colossal issue, but this isn't normal that two teammates get into a fist fight on national television like that. Like, that's a sign of something being off. And it is interesting to me that since the Commanders released Jonathan Allen, you slowly but surely have heard some stuff from people who cover the team about Allen behind the scenes. He was a problem, and you can tell very clearly from listening between the lines to what people who cover the team are saying. They won't come out and say it. But look, I'll just be blunt with you. I had an off-the-record conversation with someone who covers the team who told me Allen was not all that he was built up to be. He could be a pain in the butt behind the scenes. And that's part of why the team got rid of him this offseason. And it's interesting to me when you look back at the team getting rid of Allen, the team wanted to get rid of him. Okay, tried to trade him, and then when it couldn't trade him, said, all right, just release him. Like they were done with him. That's very clear, and that was very telling. This team, with its poorest defensive line, chose to release this guy. Felt like the team was better off without this guy. So, I don't know if that is what has been holding Daron Payne back or what. I mean, I don't think it speaks well to Payne if, in fact, he has been held back by Jonathan Allen's presence. Like, if you're a good player, you're a good player. But it is interesting to me that, like, as time goes on, the more and more we hear about Allen, the more and more that it seems like he was not necessarily the locker room leader that he was perceived to be for so many years.
You are still getting a weird sound on your audio. I just want you to be able to sound as good as you can. Um, I think it's interesting because so much of the time we think we know what's going on, and we find a guy like John Allen, and it seems like he'd been here through multiple regimes. It seemed like staffs liked him, former son of the military, and so I think we thought he was like the leader and the guy that was really in charge, and to find out that maybe behind the scenes people were not just coaching staff, but sounds like players also were getting a little fed up on that thing, because to Al's point, they just released him, and that generally never happens that way. You could tell they just wanted him out. So as we wait for Al to get back and work out his technical issues, I wanted his voice to be clear enough for everybody to hear it. Let's see here, we go now here. Okay, we will try again with Al here. Al, I was just talking about how so much behind the scenes stuff we just don't know. It felt like everybody assumed that Allen was the leader of the team, and the teammates kind of rallied around him. And it maybe that wasn't the case at all, because generally teams don't just release guys like Jonathan Allen. So Jonathan Allen in, out. I think that helps with Newton, who probably wasn't fully healthy last year, coming off the. I think what they've shown is this year they plan on ends that stop the rush, that stop the run, and then moving the inside of the pocket, which I think has become, I don't know if trendier is the right word, but I mean, obviously, the fastest place from one place to another is a straight line. And you can see that they are building the inside a little bit.
Yeah, they don't seem to be as worried about edge defender as everyone on the outside. And I think that's kind of telling. And it makes me think that maybe we are overrating the edge defender thing a little bit, even though on paper, I mean, it's hard to be overly enthused about what the team has at edge defender. But I think if this team valued that spot more, the team would have done more at that position this offseason. And we just haven't seen that. Now, I do think it'll be interesting to see if maybe the team over the course of the next few weeks signs one of these veteran edge guys who are still out there, like a Von Miller or a Jadeveon Clowney. And I also think that it stands out that Joe Witt, a week or so ago when he spoke said that the plan with, say, Javon Kinlaw is to move him up and down the line. So he'll play both as an interior defensive lineman and as an edge guy. So I think the team has a plan for edge defender. But to your point, I do think that over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, there has been this uptick in value in interior pass rush because you can negate edge pass rush to a large degree if you have a quarterback who gets rid of the football quickly. And more, we're seeing that. Quarterbacks throwing short, quarterbacks, really paying attention to time to throw and getting rid of footballs in, I don't know, 2.4 seconds or less or whatever the number may be. And so, you can have whoever you want on the edge. But if quarterbacks are getting rid of balls quickly, there's only so much that those edge guys can do. And like you said, that quickest path to the quarterback is going to be that straight line. So, I think that does go back to, say, a Daron Payne. If he can be what he is supposed to be, I think that really helps things. And so I really look at that and say, all right, if this defensive line is going to be better, a lot of change has been made to it. But kind of the irony of this is that the key to this whole thing may well be a guy who's been here for a while now, going into his 8th season. And if Payne is who he can be, then I think this defensive line can be quite good. And if Payne has another mediocre season off the big money contract extension he signed in 2023, then it's hard to see how this defensive line ends up being anything better than, say, mid, and that I think is the reality here, because I don't know how much upside there is with any of these defensive linemen beyond Daron Payne. Like, someone like a Dietrich Wise or a Dorrance Armstrong, they could be solid, right? But in terms of like who has the potential to truly be great, I think it's Payne. Javon Kinlaw's talented, but he has never been close to great. So I don't know that you even say that he has that upside. Payne has that upside, and you just hope like heck that he realizes it.
If this sounds incredible to say, because I think the fan base at least is clamoring for Daron Payne to be gone immediately. What do they do with Daron Payne if he indeed has another contract year? I mean, I think he's still only 27 years old, 26 years old.
Yeah, so I am not interested in paying him another big money extension. I think there's a lesson that should have been learned from these last few years. So to me, if he has a great season, then I think you trade him next off season and you cash in on that great season. You let somebody else pay him and you get back, say, a first or second round pick for him. Conversely, if he has a bad season, then I think he gets released. So I think it's a funny deal. Either way, I think there's a good chance this ends up being his final season with Washington, just because of when you think about this logically. I mean, to give him another big money deal if he has a great contract season, and I put contract season in quotation marks. This is not technically a contract season. He's got 2 years left, but it's a pseudo contract season because it becomes very cuttable after this season. But to give him another big money deal or to extend him after this season or just to continue paying him big money beyond this season, it's hard to trust that with what we've seen here. I mean, here to me is the truth about Daron Payne. 7 years with Washington. He's had one really good season, 2022. His other seasons have either been mediocre or like pretty good, but not very good. Like, prior to 2022, I never watched him and said, wow, what a great player. I said, okay, he's a good player. He's been very durable. I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. But I think we're past the point of talking about like the talent of Daron Payne. There's been a lot of that over the years of like, wow, this guy is really talented. He might be the most talented defensive lineman they have. But 7 years into your career, like you need to have delivered on that in more than one season. And I just see it as he's had one great season. So let's see. I'm rooting for the guy. I hope his 2025 is another great season. But either way, I do think there's an at least decent chance that this is his last season with Washington.
You mentioned Dorrance Armstrong, and he kind of gotten forgot last year. He was one of a very few amount of guys they brought in and gave a multi-year contract to. I think Dan might have, seen something he liked from his time in Dallas. You could kind of see what they expected out of him in the playoff game. He was more effective there. What do we expect of him this year?
Well, one of the most telling things I thought as last season went on was Joe Witt Jr. in December saying that Dorrance Armstrong had been the most consistent defensive lineman on the team that season, last season. And that stood out, first of all, because we did not hear Witt say a Duron Payne. John Allen was hurt for a good bit of last year. We did not hear Witt say Dante Fowler, even with all the sacks. We heard Witt say Armstrong. So I think internally he graded out a lot better than people may realize. And then he had a pretty good postseason run. So look, I don't look at Armstrong and see as like some guy. The team's saying like number one edge guy. I don't think Armstrong is a number one edge guy. I think he's a number two guy, and maybe ideally a number three. But for right now, you probably would have to call him the number one edge guy on this team, just because of the season that he had, at least from an internal perception standpoint last season. So yeah, that I think is part of the issue here. I mean, it's interesting. You look at like national evaluations of the Commanders roster with the defensive line, and they are regarded as having one of the worst, if not the worst, defensive lines in the NFL. Now, I'm not ready to say that that's the case. To me, there's a bit of an Adam Peters we trust here that's in effect, and I'd like to think that the many moves that have been made with the defensive line are going to result in this unit being improved. But it is hard to ignore this, that when you look at like national rankings and evaluations of rosters, the Commanders are perceived to have one of the poor defensive lines. So we'll see. It was always interesting to me when we had the 4 first-round defensive linemen, right? Chase Young, Montez Sweat, John Allen, Duron Payne. I always felt like the whole was less than the sum of the parts. I feel like with this unit, maybe we get the opposite, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Like you look at each individual player, you're not overwhelmed, but maybe collectively you get an output that is in fact better than the individual players would suggest. So we'll see.
And with some sort of a rotation, I mean, you mentioned Dietrich Wise, who I think might not get talked about enough, was on those Patriots units and understands how to be a professional football player. I think they like some of the young guys, Jean Baptiste. This will be an interesting year for him. He had gotten kind of hot before he got hurt last year. And I think the other guy that doesn't get talked about enough, he got hurt early too, but 2 sacks in 2 games. Clelin Ferrell felt like he was off to a fairly good year last year, and it just kind of fizzled out on him. So I do think that in year 2 for Zerhan Newton, I do think it's interesting that, to your point, the 4 studs never worked. Let's rotate everybody, keep them fresh, and just attack, attack, attack. Will be interesting to see how it works.
Yeah,
If we
yeah.
move on,
There's also two we know. They view Frankie Louvu as kind of a pseudo edge
sure.
defender, and so maybe they use him even more as an edge guy. So maybe maybe he becomes the new Dante Fowler in terms of like double-digit sacks this coming season. So we'll see. I mean, there are ways to scheme up pressure, and this is where, to go back to your initial question, you hope that the coaching staff can deliver on this and maximize these guys. So we'll see.
And the segue, we'll use that as a segue with you've got Louvu back there, you've got Wagner, and I know, and from last year, they were super pumped about McGee, and he got hurt, and they just that was that was that. But they had a specific plan for him. If he can be everything that they hoped he'd be, that also will be a big deal for this year.
Yeah, well, Witt said that they had a package of plays for Jordan McGee for last
Right?
season. And that really stood out because, here's a guy, 5th-round rookie, and that they actually had a package of plays for him. It's like, wow, they really value this guy. So, we get it that the top 2 linebackers on this team are clear in Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner. But like we just said with Louvu, he's not necessarily only a linebacker. And so the notion of having 3 quote unquote linebackers on the field at once is not that far fetched, because maybe you're deploying Louvu as an edge defender on those plays. McGee is interesting. He just needs to stay healthy. He missed a lot of time last year due to multiple injuries. They do seem to like him. So I'm excited for him. Let's see what he can do. But that's one of those internal improvement type deals where, from the outside, most people are going to look at that and say, okay, whatever, a 5th-round rookie last year who was hurt most of the season. But if he can stay healthy, and if he is what this team believes that he could be, that's a huge upgrade for this team for sure. You talk about like getting your best 11 on the field. Perhaps he can be one of those guys who like makes for a best 11 and makes a real impact here this season.
The interviews that have been coming out with Marshawn Lattimore, uh, make it seem quite obvious that he was not healthy last year. Got on the field, tried to play because he wanted to prove to the Commanders that they had made a good decision. If he's fully healthy this year, then it kind of gets to the point that we all expected. And that trade was less about last year and more about this year. And if he's anything close to primetime Lattimore and Amos is anywhere close to what they think, other than the depth, the starters actually become a real benefit to the team, something we haven't had in a long time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think even the depth might end up being quite good. Like if you look at the potential top 5 at corner, and this to me goes back to if Lattimore is healthy and good, and those are two big ifs. But if those things are in the affirmative, Lattimore, Amos, Sainristil, Jonathan Jones, Noah Igbenogany, that's not a bad top 5 at corner. I mean, that's actually pretty good if you think about it. And it's interesting. Jonathan Jones was one of the more high-profile free agent acquisitions this offseason. If everyone is healthy, I don't know how much Jones is playing because Lattimore, Amos, and Sanders still figured to be the top 3 corners. So Jones could be an odd man out here. Now, you can't just assume everyone's going to be healthy. I get that. But I think it's kind of funny how this might actually end up playing out for Jonathan Jones. I don't know that this team expected to take a corner as high as it did in the draft. They were thrilled, the Commanders were, that Amos fell to them at 61. I think that has been made clear here. But no doubt, like that top 3 at corner, especially if Lattimore is what he can be, Amos, there's a ton of optimism with him. Sanders still had the promising rookie season. So I'm excited about this team at cornerback. I think that actually could end up being the best position group on the defense if things break the way you want them to break. So, I think there are a lot of questions with the D-line. Linebacker, you feel good about. I think with linebacker would just be one of these years, Bobby Wagner, mortality is going to strike. Like he's not going to be great forever. At least I don't think he is, right? So, that would just be the concern with linebackers, that at some point there will be a fall-off season for Wagner. Is this season. And then with corner, I think there's a real chance for that group to be good. So we'll see.
They could have kept Chin. It did not cost a ton of money out there in Las Vegas. They went with Will Harris instead. I guess safety is the most concerning spot on the defense now.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how you view defensive line. The safety thing to me, I don't think there's been enough conversation about what happened with Chin, because all we heard as last season went on was how happy they were with Chin. And then they let him go in free agency, and he doesn't get that much money from the Raiders.
No.
Like, that was a more than matchable contract, and it was only a 2-year contract. It's not like he got some, lengthy deal. I think this team prefers Will Harris. Like, I look at it, I know Harris came a little cheaper than Chin did, but for all of the good things that were said about Chin, I think this team prefers Will Harris. And so if that's the case, then maybe this team actually ends up being better at safety than we think, because we know the team loves Quan Martin. And it turns out that he was playing much of last season with 2 separated shoulders, and he still ended up having a decent season. So safety could actually end up being a snake.
Well, we're losing you a little bit here, Al, and that's okay. One of the other things that we didn't get to that I think is interesting was Joe Wood's comment about needing to get Jeremy Reeves more involved in the actual play. Can't say enough good things about Jeremy Reeves in the arc. Got made the team, cut the team, made the team, then became a stalwart at all right, we got you back here.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. It just dropped for some reason.
Yeah, no, it's okay. You were.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yeah. As
Okay.
part of safety. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just with Jeremy Chin, I just thought they seem to prefer Will Harris. So we'll see if, in fact, they were correct about that. But Chin drew a lot of praise in I remember Witt last year talking about how Chin sort of embodied the way that he wants this defense to play, and then they let him walk in free agency, and that's how I do view it. They let him walk because I think they very much could have matched that contract that he got from the Raiders.
And I think Chin thought he was coming back. Like I've heard a couple of interviews where I think he was caught off guard that he liked it here. He thought they liked him here. And to your point, it was a really easy contract to match. I mean, there was not a lot of money. Al, before we get out of here, I was hoping you'd give us a couple minutes on just how incredible Jeremy Chin's run here in Washington has been.
How incredible whose run has been?
Jeremy Reeves.
Oh yeah, Jeremy Reeves. It's remarkable. So he entered the NFL as an undrafted free agent out of South Alabama with the Eagles in April 2018. He was initially signed by Washington in September 2018, was signed to the practice squad, and now he signed a one-year contract extension to where if he fulfills it, it'll be 9 seasons with Washington, 2018 through 2026. And it's a pretty remarkable deal, not only because he was an undrafted free agent, but because this is a guy who got cut in Washington's cut down to 53 in each of 3 consecutive seasons at one point. It wasn't until 2022 that he actually made the 53-man roster at a training camp. So, this has been someone who has had to fight for like every minute on the 53-man active roster during his time with this team. And all he has done is excel on special teams and actually do a good job at safety when called upon. In 2020, he was a key player for Washington down the stretch in winning, yes, what was a bad NFC East, and then also being competitive with Tampa Bay in that playoff game. Reeves in that playoff game, I think this may get forgotten. He blocked an extra point attempt in that game. He blocked a Ryan Suckup extra point attempt in that playoff loss to the Bucs. And then 2022, he's All-Pro Revo. He makes the first team All-Pro as the special teams ace with his great work on special teams. And I think it says a ton that this team thought enough of him to extend him before training camp even started this year. Like, forget about the preseason or the regular season. Before we even get to camp, heck, before the mandatory mini camp was over, this team signed him to an extension. Now, I get it. He wasn't some super costly extension, but still, like, the team made it a point to extend him. So I think it says a ton about him. I always have great respect for guys like this in the NFL who have to fight and scratch and claw to make teams, to stick on teams, and he has done that. And, you think about his time with Washington, 2018 to now, he was here for the Jay Gruden, Bruce Allen regime, was here for the Ron Rivera regime, and now is here for the Dan Quinn, Adam Peters regime. So 3 different regimes have thought enough of Jeremy Reeves to have him on the team like this. I think that says a ton about him as a player and as a person.
I couldn't agree with you more, and he's got what they call the commander tag now. Al, we're breaking up on you a little bit more, so we will let you go, but I appreciate your time today. Always enjoy our football discussions.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.